Hey, welcome all you cool cats out there in ACSA land. Cats and kittens, I guess. We're broadcasting to you live from Charlotte and I guess DC, wherever Mike is, but most of us are in Charlotte, North Carolina. Otherwise known, as we were saying, as the QC, Quarantine City, Queen City, sometimes better known in better times. We were asked by ACSA, Mike and I were chatting, and we had shared some news about a team that we have lined up for you today to talk about some work that we're doing that we thought would be both a ray of sunshine in these tumultuous times and maybe also spread some ideas that other folks could pick up on. So it's not very formal in its format, although we do have a couple of slides that we'll go through. But I'll just kind of give a brief introduction to what a team of folks in the College of Arts and Architecture here at UNC Charlotte have been up to. They'll describe a little bit the pace and scale and rate at which they've had an impact locally with the profession, and maybe share with you some DIY pointers about how this could be replicated in other places. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
So today's cast of characters, all but one, Alex Cabral, our Director of Fabrication in the College of Arts and Architecture, Heather Freeman, Professor of Digital Media in the College of Art, in the Department of Art and Art History, Robbie Sachs, our Fabrication Manager in School of Architecture, and Thomas Schmidt, Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary 3D Design, and me just here moderating as the MC for the afternoon. What we wanted to share with you are some of the things that are happening on our campus, which I think are probably not too dissimilar from some of your own. If I can get my little slides to move. There we go. So some of you may have seen this if you're local today. Some of our dorms are being quarantined or taken offline for quarantine, potentially as a field hospital, given the outbreak that we see coming already present in the country, with our peaks projected a couple of weeks away. All of that to provide some of the context that Robbie and Alex, Heather and Tom have been addressing for probably 2 or so weeks now. They've been part of a larger team. There's now a 501c3 behind them, helping sponsor some of the material costs, a network of DIY, grassroots folks, 3D printing, laser cutting, and what is it, plastic foam injections or something they'll tell you about, that is now producing a series of masks for local hospitals and medical professionals here in Charlotte. All of this done through grassroots, garage-driven techniques, some open source software from online, and some software and suggestions that they'll be happy to share with you all as we go through, as we get into questions and answers a little bit later on. But I would prefer to let the rock stars take the stage themselves and talk to you a little bit about the kind of work that's been covered already, some of it in the press locally on a couple of websites and the newspapers locally, and then maybe now share with us a little bit of the background, share with us a little bit of where things are right now, and what the steps you've taken to begin to address the role of designers in this case, College of Arts and Architecture, and how you've begun to address your part of a pandemic crisis that we're facing nationally. Alex, did you want to start off, or who's taking lead on this one?
Yeah, I'll start. So we came into existence maybe about 2 weeks ago. Our classes had gone fully online, and I was reached out to by an engineering professor who knew that at least my lab had equipment that was not being used. He asked me if I wanted to join this team, said, sure, let's get some 3D prints going. And really started to design stuff like this, or I should say steal stuff like this. This is an existing headband from Prusa Labs, which is a Czech Republic company. And they had success in the Czech Republic getting this into their healthcare system. So that's the one that's been most widely spread at this point. So we took that, we started 3D printing them. We started to build a team of people within our college who had similar equipment. And we started to find people out in the community of Charlotte that had similar equipment to create a print farm of sorts. We quickly developed into a team that had drop-off locations at different parts of the city, where all of these things would be funneled to one location. They would be assembled and delivered immediately to people that are on the front lines. And that was kind of where we started, how quickly we could get parts and protective equipment to people on the front lines. And so part of that was the 3D printing component. That allowed us to be really nimble. It allowed us to iterate and test some things. It allowed us to get feedback directly from the doctors that we were working with. The design side was that it allowed us to make changes. We had software skills and we had access to materials that we could make rapid changes to our products based on what doctors were saying they needed or didn't need. The group that we have here today is really kind of a mix between Robbie Sachs, who is doing a lot of the design work to get this to manufacturing, Heather Freeman and Tom Schmidt, who are doing a lot of the 3D printing components and have since kind of morphed into looking at other areas that are needs right now for the healthcare workers. And I can just give you, I guess I will say I ended up becoming a logistics maniac for a warehouse full of thousands of pieces of parts that have come off an injection molder. So the goal of our group has been to fill a gap with 3D printing and try to move these products into mass manufacturing as quickly as possible to serve the need that's out there. We have done that successfully. In a process that usually takes 6 to 8 weeks, we were able to get a company local to Charlotte to open their doors to us, to work on the designs with us and make us tooling for an injection molder in 3 days. They started pushing out parts that following weekend, and starting this past week, we were able to get about 4,000 to 6,000 parts per day. We've since run into issues with other supply chain things and have started, today was the first day that we had about equal numbers of all components that could go together. So I just got here from the warehouse to make this call, and we shipped out to small practices, to sole proprietors of hospitals, people who are not affiliated with some of the big corporate hospitals. We shipped out about 1,000 face shields to them today. Earlier this week, we shipped out 1,500 face shields to Atrium, who is our biggest hospital, and another 750 to Novant, who is our second biggest hospital. We have about 5,000 more face shields that we bagged and packaged today that will go out on Monday. And so we're starting to see about 5,000 units per day being able to go out on the front lines and impact people who are working. So this has been huge. I've talked to other schools who have either tried to do this and gotten shut down for liability purposes. We've worked really hard with the doctors to find a way to make these headbands or these face shields work for them and for their risk management people. And that's been my role in this right now, has been keeping people moving, keeping product moving, and trying to get as quickly the most amount of stuff out to the front lines. With that said, I'd like to hear from, Robbie, Heather, and Tom about what they're working on, and really from Robbie right now about how the design of this thing came to be and his experience, not as an architect, to lead us to a place where this could be injection molded.
Sure thing. I guess if I just start talking, it'll ping on me, or do I need to share my screen or anything?
No, people can hear you, I think.
Okay,
Everyone
that's
can
fine. So my name is Robbie Sachs. I came to work at the School of Architecture in UNCC in kind of a circuitous path. I am not an architect by trade or work or any kind of means. My background is in industrial design, and for the most part, the things that have come to help me through this project is way too much work in the restaurant manufacturing business, producing all kinds of gadgets and guns that squirt Big Mac sauce onto various hamburgers and things like that. But the critical component in doing all of that work is that I had a long background of working with injection molders. So we were able to take the Prusa design headband that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of right now. If not, there are, we can probably post some links to all of this. But literally all I did, which would be highly frowned upon any other time, was take the geometry from these existing headbands that we knew worked that we knew were functioning, that we knew were getting people face coverage under circumstances where people were allowing these into certain hospitals, and adapted it for injection molding. So it has key design features for that type of equipment. This would be a design that would not be great to 3D print because it is optimized for injection molding. And with this, we were able to go from, I think, printing a printed part was taking somewhere between 3.5 hours, 3.5, 4 hours. And we can pop 2 of these headbands out, I think every 40 seconds. So, you know, we're making a part that took over 3 hours in 20 seconds. We did that by kind of finding a local group and a couple plastic injection molders here. We found, you know, materials, we found sources, we went back and forth, and were able to very quickly appropriate a design that we knew worked and get it off the ground and get it running and get these parts in. There was a temptation, certainly, to make this thing better. What's our take on it? What's our spin on it? How can we improve these features? Does everything work as well as it could be? So as we were producing these, we still are talking about some of the design iteration that a normal project would go through, but we were able to move very quickly. And just to give you kind of a taste of normal circumstances that I've worked in before, a project like this, even a simple part, takes months. Kind of a running motto I've always had in my head, being on the other side and seeing how things are made in production facilities and factories in this country and China, all over the world, is I'm always constantly amazed that anything even gets made at all. There's so many times when there are stop productions, when there are extra meetings, when there are design reviews, and we have, because of this emergency, I will say, we have had the luxury of not paying attention to our desires to meet and discuss and talk about things too much and overanalyze. This is all about cranking out product, and that has been our priority. So we were able to get not just the mold for the headband, but for this bottom piece that conforms the rest of the mask. And through Alex's work and a lot of our other source shops throughout Charlotte, were able to find laser cutters and produce these masks close to about 6,000 units a day and get them distributed. So if you are out there and you are currently trying to think of something and trying to inject yourself into solutions, I would encourage everybody at this point, you know, don't worry about patents, just steal everybody else's stuff. Get it in, you know, into the existing infrastructure, start getting this stuff out, and we can let all the lawyers and logistics catch up to us.
How about we suggest they steal your stuff?
That's fine. That's fine. I'm more than happy to share the injection molding design and all of the stuff. We have resources for that. So if you have access to some of this same equipment, if you know people that have access to some of this same equipment, we can get you running and producing these at the same speeds.
Oh, so you didn't get the state-of-the-art one that makes your vision perfect.
Heather and Tom, do you guys want to talk about some of the efforts that are taking place with all of the 3D printers across Charlotte, North Carolina?
Sure. I guess I'll start, but I'll sign that off to Tom pretty fast. Just some background to how Tom and I got into it. We're both professors of art at UNC Charlotte, and I think a lot of us were reading the same articles around the same time about the guys in Italy who were 3D printing parts for ventilators, and so probably around the same time that Alex was getting hooked up with Terrence Fagan in mechanical engineering. I was emailing him and other folks trying to say if there's something we could get started. So I think the point is, I think a lot of different cities probably have similar efforts sort of happening around the same time. And so if you're living in, you know, Montreal, for example, I would say look around to see if there's already groups doing this where you are locally and see if you can tap into them, because I know this is only 10 days since we got started, but it feels like we've been working for months on this.
It's only 10 days. That's crazy.
I know. I had a Zeeks. My background is in animation, but I did a stop motion animation using a 3D printer years ago. And so I started helping to print these Prusa face shields on my Zeeks. And then we got permission, Tom and I, from our department chair to take other DigiFab gear home. Around that same time, our website for Charlotte Medi went live, and we all of a sudden had volunteers coming out of the woodwork from all over the county and neighboring counties who all wanted to help 3D print. It's very psychologically helpful to feel like you're not just sitting around at home waiting for the world to end, that you can actually help. And I think a lot of people really want to connect to that. So getting volunteer community makers has not been a problem. I mean, I look at the lists every day, and every day we have about 20 new makers still adding on to the 3D printed headband parts. And now we're starting to look at other projects. And one of the things that's coming up is the idea of face masks, sort of like these ones. And the problem with them is that they're incredibly time consuming to make. And most of the people who are making them take a lot of good care in the craft of it. But we're trying to figure out what's that balancing point between speed and effectiveness and craft, just to keep it from falling apart on the user. So we're trying to see right now if we can leverage digital fabrication technologies into manufacturing these much, much faster and treating them as disposable, which is technically how you're supposed to use them. But I'll let Tom talk now.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Schmidt. I also teach in the Department of Art and Art History. And my background is actually in ceramics, of all things. But more recently, I've been teaching myself more and more digital fabrication. And those are some of the classes that I'm teaching now at UNC Charlotte. There's a couple different classes which fall under sculpture, but they're actually very much trying to teach some of these tools like 3D printing and using the laser cutter as these kind of connectors between different disciplines. And this has been such a humbling experience, and I'm so thankful to Heather and to everyone else on the team for really taking the initiative to make this happen, because as Heather said, I think it's really so important in this moment when all of us feel somewhat helpless to have an opportunity to kind of share our skills and to collaborate and to work together. And to me, that's really philosophically what I think is so exciting about this technology, is that it's this kind of shared platform that a lot of different disciplines kind of connect through. It's this kind of shared language in what could otherwise be very kind of disparate fields. And so this is, to me, one of the first times when I truly have been sort of thrown into a project where everyone is connecting across disciplines, and it's for this very important cause. And as was mentioned earlier, there's these kind of opportunities all around the world. So if you have that desire to contribute, whether it's in some technical way, whether it's 3D printing, designing, or simply just volunteering to help, we have a lot of people who are just kind of running materials around town, and that's equally important in this process. So there's just so much that we can do collectively. When it comes to the 3D printing part, it's been interesting to be in this position now where I've taught for many years about, the potential of 3D printing, and when it comes to being able to design in an iterative way where you can kind of design something, improve it, prototype it, test it. If something fails, you can tweak it. And this is such a great example of that really coming into play, that there's teams all across the world that are trying to come up with solutions. What I would say, without really being too close into the depths of this whole process, is there's challenges that come with that too, where, on one hand, you can make quick changes within your own team, within your own community, but I also get the feeling that there's some lag time when it comes to this kind of collective learning, collective sort of prototyping that's happening around the globe, so that if someone's making a drastic improvement, it might not necessarily be seen by everybody. So everyone's kind of improving upon this in their smaller like satellite teams. But I think in order for everyone to kind of make improvements collectively, it requires you to be kind of tuned in globally and locally in a way. And when you have other things going on in your life, you know, you're still trying to, in our cases, we're still teaching classes and doing other things. I think it's challenging to really pull this off in the most efficient way. But thanks to those people on this team that are really dedicating themselves, you know, like Alex and Robbie and Heather, I think they're really committing so much time and effort to making this happen. I think it is really running as quickly as possible. And I think the logistics of making this run smoothly is one of the biggest takeaways. I think that's something that would really be worth exploring more. Like, how do you actually get this to run the most efficient way? Like Alex, maybe at some point you could talk more about how did this actually get so quickly into that sort of injection molding process? You know, if other cities or with groups like ours are trying to kind of make that leap of connecting with industry, are there any tips or tricks that we can use to help that to happen?
Just to add on to Tom's question for Alex, for the team actually, Heather, you hinted at this earlier. Campus was closed down, so you've all brought 3D printers home from our labs to be able to get this off the ground. That was one initial step. So I think to add on to Tom's question, you know, there's that one question about taking the next leap. What's the next big step? Injection molding or whatever, or to cloth masks. What was that first set of steps that got you guys off the ground and running even at 300 or 400 pieces a day?
That's a good question.
It was just stealing resources from the university.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would say that, I mean, beyond the resources, it was just kind of a collective urgency to see this thing happen. And I think our initial goal, you know, we made this goal of donating 10,000 masks, which I think started at 1,000 masks. And so we had just a goal and we had an urgency amongst a group of people with access to equipment. And so we took it upon ourselves to take that stuff and ask for forgiveness later and start to push these printers and contribute to this larger group. So, and I shot our link in the chat window. It's charlottemedi.org, and we've kind of established ourselves. This is not just a UNC Charlotte effort. This is the effort of Charlotte Latin, a local high school, Providence Day School, people that just found our website or knew us and asked us how they could help and happened to have printers at their house. You know, UNC Charlotte has played a key role in helping to support this group and to bring design resources and equipment resources. The jump for us to manufacturing was, well, the initial jump was just there was an urgency to get these things done. And we wanted to mobilize as many people who wanted to help and who had this equipment but didn't necessarily have an outlet to organize. And so we started producing about 100 3D print units per day. And that was great. But we knew that we were not going to meet any type of demand as COVID ramps up or as it reaches its peak in the next couple of weeks. And so the move for us has been to get to manufacturing really quickly. We knew that there was going to be a gap in industry and in medical suppliers who could do this work. And so our goal has been, let's fill that gap. Let's get as many units as we possibly can out there. And if and when somebody catches up that does this for a living, they will crush us. And that is the point. They should totally take us out and move in and make more units than we possibly can. Those conversations with the injection molders came from a group of people who just had contacts that they weren't afraid to reach out to people that maybe they knew secondhand or knew that had equipment similar. And we had, I think our design team, Robbie, was 4 people or 5 people at one
Yeah,
point.
we really spent a lot of efforts leveraging existing relationships that we had with not only manufacturers but with vendors. I think we probably are sitting on maybe every sheet of 20,000's PETG in the city. But not only talking to the vendors that we know and work with, but cold calling almost every single person that we could get in touch with, driving to nearby cities to talk to people and have meetings. It was a small group, but it was focused. And the one thing that's been moving this probably quicker than any other project that I've been on is that this is impacting everyone. This is a story that is running through everybody's lives and everybody's trying to help. So there are people in your community that have a way to help you, whether it's a 3D printer that they have or some, injection molding machines that they haven't even really considered as, an application or a tool for for helping during this time.
And one of the biggest slowdowns in this process for injection molding is the time it takes to make tooling. So I agree with Robbie. The urgency among everybody has led to people donating warehouse space, donating trucks. Our deliveries today went out through the 2U laundry service. They took they used their logistics systems that exist, and they just plugged in our addresses and said, we'll come and pick up your stuff and we'll drop it off at all of these sole practitioners from out throughout the Charlotte metro within an hour and a half radius from where we were. And so people that are willing to donate that time or the space has been phenomenal. We've partnered with other industries who laid people off, and we were able to give them some work to bring people back on. We started a GoFundMe, and so we're able to kind of fund a lot of this stuff and get people working, especially at the production numbers that we have now. So yeah, we leveraged resources and contacts at a time where everybody was feeling it. We had a staff meeting the other day, and I posed this question of, trying to get in touch with people. And we immediately got in touch with the Foundations of the Carolinas, and who got us in touch with Coca-Cola to try to produce materials that we could use for this project at the quantities. And that was a series of phone calls and favors and things like that. But I think the group that we have is pretty shameless. And so we're okay with calling and explaining what we're doing. I will, excuse me. The last thing I'll say for now is the goal of this group has always been to move this into manufacturing, this particular product into manufacturing as quickly as possible, make something that can be replicated, and give all of our IP away to people who need to repeat this. We cannot be shipping hundreds of thousands of units across the country. That's not efficient. But if you can make some of those contacts, we will give you all of the work that we've done. We will make things available for you. We will put you in contact with our manufacturers and distributors to make sure that your project is seamless and maybe doesn't have the obstacles we have. And that is happening now. I just got off a phone call with people in New Jersey who are doing this and have access to the equipment, but don't know their way around. And that's kind of our role now, or at least my role now, is getting people mobilized across the country.
It's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Jose, but I'd like to add something too on the other side of this that I think has been a real interesting feature of this project. And that's the fact that we have not slowed down our individual 3D printing efforts across the city as well. So even as we are, cranking out these parts, we've kept this community of printers active, because they can still produce parts. It's not as fast. We can fill smaller orders with those 3D printed parts. Those parts are working. That's a supply chain that is still critical, and it keeps people involved, and it's kept the community just strong and thriving without having to wait. It's kept a lot of people having an impact and feeling like they're doing something. So if they can make 3 a day or 6 a day, I know I've got the 2 machines that I have at my house going night and day, and my wife and child are probably sick of hearing them. But it's kept our community engaged. It's kept people involved. So I would say, even as your communities maybe start to move to bigger processes, keep those people involved, because that's where a lot of our partnerships have come from. That's where a lot of our community outreach, all kinds of other contacts have come from people who that's been their entry point. We have a group of volunteers that don't have 3D printers. They sit around their house and they cut elastic bands for the headbands constantly. So there are big parts of this, there are small parts of this, but the entire thing takes all of those components. It is not just what gets put on those trucks, what comes off of those production lines. It's a lot of individual efforts as well.
That's fantastic. I've got a quick question maybe for Heather and Tom. Now that the masks are coming online, I'm curious about how other designers that you might know from the artistic side, whether they're painters or sculptors or ceramicists like yourself, Tom, other folks who might have textile abilities that might contribute to the masks, or other areas that you might see design communities coming in that wouldn't normally live within a traditional College of Arts and Architecture, for example.
Yeah, we actually, when we first started, we got approached by the city of Charlotte to make cloth masks for first responders, police and fire, for bus drivers who are still working, and for sanitation workers. And because right now the CDC finally changed their guidelines and said you should wear bandanas if you don't have anything else. We reached out to the faculty in the fibers department, and they're sort of testing out different designs and giving recommendations. One of the challenges that we're realizing within this is figuring out the speed element of things. This is not necessarily a beautiful craftsmanship issue. This is how fast can you crank these out and have them still be effective. Fortunately, like Alex was saying, there's a lot of cold calling that happens. There's a lot of harassing people sometimes to get their insights on things. So we're starting to do some research. You know I'm blanking on the word for it, but it's that blue paper that has like a plastic coating on one side that they lay surgical tools on. There's another version of that doesn't have a plastic coating, so it's breathable. It's very, very similar to blue shop towels, if you know what those are.
Oh, okay.
But there's been some really good experiments with that. And again, these are other people doing research, and we're sort of trying to rip off those designs to test them here. One of the things I wanted to add on to what Robbie was saying about people in the community being so essential to this. We have some makers in a neighboring county, for instance, who have been 3D printing parts. And just the other day, they were saying, is any of this going to get to our county's ER? Because right now they don't have anything. And so one of the things that we've been sort of struggling with a little bit is, where is that front line? Alex is probably sick of me like being on my soapbox about this, like trying to figure out where is the front line of COVID-19. Obviously it's COVID-19 units, but beyond that, what is that? Is that social workers? Is that actually sanitation workers? I
think you need just a taller soapbox, because I'm not
Right?
tired of it
Okay.
at all. I just want to get as much stuff out as humanly possible.
Right, exactly. And I mean, so basically anytime I get somebody saying, hey, how do we get this for our ER? I say, hey, there's a PPE request on our website. Go fill that out. Like just fill it out and we'll get it to you somehow.
I will say, Heather, that today we cleaned anything that wasn't affiliated with Atrium or Novant, because we've made big donations. All of those have been cleared out today.
Oh, you rock. Yeah. But one of the things that I've found really interesting is there are in some institutions these kind of blocks. So I was, speaking of cold calling, I was cold calling today around Gaston County, which is a neighboring county to us. It's relatively poor compared to Mecklenburg County. They don't have a lot of resources. They have Gaston College, which has some digifab facilities, and they have the Gaston County Public Libraries, where they have 2 maker spaces. And so I was like calling them and emailing them, and finally got one response from the libraries basically saying, well, all our workers are home until, this date, and so we can't do anything. And you're trying to very kindly say, hey, can you forward this message to your higher ups, and just offer to those employees the option to come and pick up this 3D printer and take it home and work it. Like, you can't make people do things, but just try, see if they want to do it. So one of the weird hurdles is this sort of sense of inertia that I think some institutions are subject to. And so you have a lot of people who really want to help. And so an organization like ours, one of our strengths, I think, has been giving, facilitating or creating a space where people can come and plug into it and help in whatever capacity they can. One of the things that I just think it's important to think about moving forward a little bit. I was reading an article, I think it was in the New York Times, about how the United States is basically buying out PPE from other nations. I'm really curious to follow up on that, see how much of that is really, really accurate. But if that's the case, then I think one of the things we have to think about is reaching out to international makerspaces and helping them begin local efforts. So.
Yeah, I might just add one other little piece, which is about just the social media and how important that has been in getting the word out. Actually, Heather had posted something about the face mask project, which she really began pushing a few days ago. And I simply just copied and pasted that in a few places, including next door of all places. And it was crazy how quickly that blew up. There happened to be other people in the Charlotte area that were sewing these face masks, and it's become this like really long thread of responses. And I think there's now a lot more people who know where to get them, and have, you know, friends and family who are nurses or bus drivers or just in positions where they really could use these face masks. So I think just trying to get the word out, and if everyone kind of shares the same important information, it really can connect to a whole community within a day. So it's just a matter of putting the word out there.
I'd like to pose a question to the group, and then maybe we can, in a few minutes, open this up through the chat to other questions that folks might have if they're tuning in. And I'll take the screensaver down so that we can read the chat boxes, or I can read the chat boxes and try to moderate that a little bit. But I guess the question I have for the group is, what advice would you give other faculty that might be tuning in right now in design programs, either architecture or interiors or art or fabrication, you know, industrial design? What would be your first piece of advice, how to get started, and maybe what's the one big obstacle that you would encourage them to avoid learning from your mistakes? How could they do that?
Everybody's so shy.
Well, there's always lag while you're looking for the mute button, I guess.
I could not figure out where my mouse button was to even shut the mute off. God, what? It really does. To Heather's point, it feels like we've been doing this for 10 months, not 10 days. I mean, I think for us, there was so much time spent just trying to get all of the pieces together. And I would say, for somebody that's starting this fresh, come and steal all of our pieces. Take all of the things that we have and run with them from where we've left them off, or at least leverage us as resources now to help you streamline this process a little bit. Take some 3D printers home, or try to mobilize a group from a distance that can kind of collect some pieces. I would say the biggest hurdle I'm finding from talking to other people, my university that I went to in Boston is having this issue, universities in New Orleans are having this issue, is getting some of these approvals from doctors and hospitals. We are really fortunate that our group started by a high schooler whose parents are both doctors at the hospitals that we're helping. So we immediately had an in to deliver this product, get it in the hands of people, have them evaluate it, bring it up the chain to risk management, and back down to people who could use it. I would encourage people to talk to the people who are using this on the front lines and get some feedback, because they will be the ones that can tell you what they're willing to take or not take, and that will help you put your efforts in a focused path.
Yeah, I guess anything that I would add to that, you know, realize too that this might not be something that you can solve on your own or with a group of people that you've known and worked with for the past however many years. It's going to take the efforts of people that you don't know. It's going to take a lot of voices coming together and having time to share and listen to those people. That being said, the thing that we've always prioritized is, you know, like, where can we get these parts? Who can make these things? It's always been action over, you know, maybe the best intentions of other people. But we have had success because of having such a large community involved and being able to leverage our skill sets together and just having a unified goal of getting these things, you know, accomplished.
And I would just say, add on to that, if you have anybody in your circle of friends or colleagues who's really good at logistics, get them in it. Like I still get emails every day where I'm like, I don't know who I should forward this to, because there's like 400 people were involved in our group now. I don't know. So Alex gets most of them and Terrence gets most of them, and I feel really bad. So you know. Yeah, I will send them all to you. Yeah, so I think having conversations really early, maybe about who's going to do what, so that you don't overburden certain people. Goodness knows, I think it's really important that you know, Alex and Robbie and Terrence and some of the folks who are working on engineering not have to bother with who's running materials. You know, so figuring out a way of delegating stuff as things get big that's ongoing. We're still working on that.
And you'll be surprised too. I think one of the most interesting things that's happened during my involvement with the plastic injection molding was that we actually had 2 of our plastic injection molders came up with designs of their own, with parts of their own, things that they were interested in. I've never had that experience. I've never sent something to be quoted for a job and made, and the production facility says, oh, we've got some ideas about how you could do this or that. So there is some involvement that is more of a two-way thing rather than this job shop scenario that's going on. So the parts that we sent were complemented by the bottom bracket of the visor was something that was designed by our plastic injection molder locally. And they didn't stop there. They just keep shooting us designs. We keep having design meetings. We're still working on other things that we can make. How can we make this better, faster, lighter, cheaper? So don't be surprised about where that help comes from, and be open to, you know, anybody with any kind of expertise that can help move this thing along.
Tom, were you going to add? It looked like for a minute you were going to add something to that.
Well, I was just trying to pull up here the Facebook group that is more like the national effort. I don't know if anyone has that handy, but that might be something worth sharing in the chat box, because if anyone is kind of looking for their sort of local effort in doing this, that might be one place to start. And I'm not sure if if the rest of the team has any other advice on where to, you know, how to begin sort of connecting with their community, but that's certainly one of them. Yeah, it looks like Alex posted it. Thanks.
I think posting those links that you've all mentioned, we can call together, create a document, maybe post it somewhere online that folks could come to with hyperlinks if needed. We can work with ACSA to come up with that, to be able to share those links and resources and contacts for you all. Couple of things here, email addresses for folks that are on this webinar. We can put these in the chat box and share communication avenues so that folks out watching today might have an opportunity to ask more detailed questions of you as individuals, or maybe general questions about how to replicate some part or process that you've already begun to develop here with your work. But maybe I can stop sharing my screen and we can see what's going on with other folks have people chime in through the chat box and see if we can pose some specific questions to you all that might be on the minds of some of our guests. Let's see if I can open the chat box. I see, okay, good. How do you think the current pandemic will change the future of education and the future of design education? It's a question that's just come up right now. Does anyone on our panel want to take a stab at that? I mean, I think you've mentioned the question about iteration without kind of questioning ideation too much. That seamless transition from idea to manufacturing. I think those are things that I think have implications for design practice generally, but maybe y'all could speak to that a little bit.
I wouldn't mind answering this from kind of a fabrication standpoint. You know, I've transitioning to an academic career has kind of showed me how a lot of these tools are used at very different levels. The 3D printer for me in the past was specifically for prototyping. I wouldn't think of making, you know, an actual part that was going to go out into the field with a 3D printer. So that surprised me. But the access and the you know, tutorials, the knowledge base that we have to run this equipment, to run modeling software, to fabricate equipment, to, you know, the communities that are out there have always kind of run kind of side by side with education. So through this process, it's been interesting to see that kind of come together, to see those communities come together to, you know, have a single-minded focus and a single-minded goal. It has not been as difficult as I thought it would be to help someone troubleshoot a 3D printer or show them how to use some of the software that they haven't used before, to get them information, to get them models. I think a lot of the things that we would have said a month ago have not necessarily been true. Some of that comes from having so many tools in an amazing shop that we love to use, and we want to make it feel like that is, you know, a hub of creation. And we might be a little reticent to let some of that go into everybody's own homes and into, you know, under their personal control. But what we're seeing now is that is a real possibility, not just creation, but also the kind of logistics and organization of this. I mean, having kind of a running dialogue in Slack about how we're doing this and how we're creating all of this stuff has some pluses and minuses, but it's been way better than the 74-hour-long meetings that we all would have had to sit through under normal circumstances to get these projects kind of rolling. So I think that we will see a lot of these resources. You know, it's cheap, it's accessible. People understand it better than we think that they do. And it will be interesting to see what kind of projects we can come up with that make people great makers in their own homes. And I think they'll appreciate and enjoy those opportunities.
I have a maybe a more personal anecdote to that question. You know, I've always worked closely with Heather and Tom, because when I was hired, I helped Tom get their lab up and running, and so we've always kind of had a relationship, and the relationship with engineering for me has always been there as well. But you know, so kind of what do I see the future of education or design education for me is this kind of interdisciplinary that we talk a lot about happened very quickly and without many borders at all. It was as simple as phone calls and emails to get people on board with a project. And I can see that moving forward being something that is a staple of what we try to do at least at UNC Charlotte. And I know every school has some interdisciplinarity clause in their mission statement right now. But for us, this is a moment that I feel like we've kind of figured some things out, and we figured out that it wasn't as difficult, and that there's an opportunity to just take some shots at some projects. And if we swing and miss, that's fine. But there are groups of people within our different disciplines that are all supporting each other and rallying around each other to make this stuff happen. And at least I hope, and maybe that's a preach to Heather, Tom, and Robbie, that this is what we continue to do moving forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that this experience is such a prime example of the need for that sort of collaborative thinking. And I really do hope that, you know, educational institutions around the world are really paying attention to this moment, because I think it's proving the strength of what can happen when teams try to connect across different areas of expertise, because something like this, it really does require people from all kinds of different backgrounds to come together and offer their own input. It's something that's been really fascinating to watch, is how everyone sort of has their own skill sets that they're bringing to the table, and you put it together, and it's just become this kind of behemoth Swiss Army knife of skill sets. And the other thing about it that I'm been sort of thinking about is just this idea of open source design as, you know, this is really kind of showing the strengths of that sort of methodology of having, you know, like design that you can share with the community that can then be built upon by a community. And that's something that in my own classes I want to maybe bring up even more than I usually do because of this circumstance. You know, how do we think about intellectual property when it comes to something like this pandemic? It's like that's kind of out the window when Robbie jokingly says, you know, steal other people's designs. Well, there's a little bit of truth to that. Like, at what point do you just sort of put down some of what would otherwise be these sort of legal barriers and just say, listen, this is way more important than that? And I think even when it comes to some of these other designs for like N95 respirators and other equipment, which is in closer contact with doctors and you know, like at what point do you allow a little bit more of, you give a little bit more leeway to the sort of legal barriers that you might face otherwise? So I think those are some of the other questions that have been coming up here.
And,
Yeah,
so go ahead, Heather, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I just totally agree with what my three colleagues have said. I mean, entirely. All of my research is based on the intersections of different disciplines, whether it's computer science and early modern history or whatever. And it's a little brutal because in the fall, I got to teach a collaborative game design class. We don't have a game design course in the art department, but I cold called colleagues in computer science and I said, let's do this. And we were moving towards doing games that were designed towards promoting issues in social justice or educational games. And so we were looking at sort of serious games. And I sort of, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but like right now, those colleagues that I was working with were lecturers. And I'm a full professor, but I have no illusions about the role of the arts in North America, or the US at least. So, you know, I'll be really happy if I have a job in the fall, to be honest. And like, maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but I'm also trying to be realistic about that. But I think it almost doesn't matter in a way, because I feel like this whole process has informed me about that importance of being able to reach out to people in other disciplines, both in times of crisis, but just in education and design in general. And I don't think any of us are going to lose those skills once this pandemic is done.
That's a great point, Heather. I wanted to come back to, Tom, you mentioned the N95 mask, and there is a question someone's asked us, John Dyer's asked us if you've had any success, or if you know of anybody that you've been in contact either locally or on the web who's been able to fabricate an N95 mask.
So I can speak to a portion of that, and I will say that there are people on our team, maybe Heather included, that is looking more actively into this research right now. We shied away from that. There, at the time that we were looking to do this work, there just wasn't good designs out there that were tested or we'll say reliable. And so we made the decision to go with the face shields because, one, our hospitals do not consider those to be a device, and therefore we had some lax regulation in order to make these things and get them in there immediately. The N95 mask is that line of protection that we cannot get wrong. And so we've looked into that. We've seen the 3D printed option. We've seen the, finding home air filters and trying to use those. We've talked to doctors. We know that we need something that's going to have a filter rating of MERV 17 to 20. The stuff that Heather was talking about, the material that's used to package medical instruments, that has supposedly been used in one case to make, I think, an N99 rated mask. And that was, there's a professor out of University of Florida that has white papers on this.
Okay.
And I can find those and share those with you, John. But he is probably the closest person that has developed a strategy. The other one that I found is, it was an MIT white paper that I shared with our group. And they are looking at how to, if you can get access to N95 material and you don't have the ability to layer it and form it, he has like this homemade cotton candy machine that you can do. And so they wrote a paper on that, and I grabbed it the other day so we could share it, because that is a real concern of a lot of the doctors that we're talking to, is they're like, cool, we have face shields, but we've all been reusing our masks for a week.
Alex, I'm going to trample over you for a second, because my 1-year-old is not respecting my boundaries. I told him I had a meeting and he doesn't care, and he's screaming right now. And I just want to make a point. A lot of research is going to come out about this. My wife works in an operating room, and I told him I'm coming. Yeah, I'll be there in a second. And the fitting process, the variations of these masks are critical. The constraints under which they're fabricated is critical. The materials, the testing, all of this stuff is critical to their performance. And I would challenge people to find things that are made that can make an impact, that don't maybe require so many boundaries and hurdles and qualifications. I know that's what everybody needs right now. What my concern is that while it's a good story, if we could do something like that, it would be incredible. I think the hurdles of actually getting there, we'd miss maybe other places where we could have an impact. I gotta go. I appreciate everybody's time.
Robbie.
Hey, Robbie.
Keep up the good work, man.
John, I'm curious for you. Are you looking at making them, or you just know that there's a need there that you need to try to fulfill?
Yeah, right. So we're working with Hennepin County Medical here, HCMC, who has put a call out to us, and we've been doing the face shields. We're at about 11,000 or so in the last couple of weeks. But the N95s have been like the top of the list, and we're just sort of exhausting every possibility in terms of trying to find a way to create, and we're approaching the same roadblocks, that the risk is just too high to get that kind of a thing wrong. So we've backed away from it for now as well. And I was just curious if anyone had managed to get over that hump.
Yeah, we have not, and I think part of our group that we've been successful. We're on track to produce 50,000 face shields in the next 10 days and distribute those with potential orders from hospitals of 15,000 a month or 250,000 over the course of this pandemic. And part of our group, so when we're trying to keep our 3D printing groups engaged in this project, our face shields are going to far outpace production. And so we're talking with people who are interested in trying to 3D print and embed fabrics and see if we can find some way to make maybe a TPU printed face mask with N95 materials embedded into it or something. Those are all ideas, and I'm not, if you haven't seen the MIT stuff or the University of Florida stuff, I'll make sure that I get those to you. We can email back and forth, because those may be faster inroads to making something. I know the MIT paper was at least written in with the idea that anybody could do it. You could do it with the spindle of your CNC router. You could do it with a drill, a Dremel. You could start to make this piece of equipment if you could get the resources of the different layers of the mask. And okay, I got your email, so good. So yeah, I think that's something that I think we're still looking at. And Heather, please jump in if you're kind of at that point of having any conversations with Johanna or anybody else on the team.
No, that's a stumbling block. That's really giant. And actually, so with looking at the cloth masks, they're not considered PPE, which is one, again, getting into the legal element of things. And there's really, I mean, I'm sorry to be crass, there's really shitty research on them. I mean, there's this amazing study from Vietnam that they had a great sample size looking at the effectiveness of cloth masks versus traditional surgical masks. And they said, cloth masks are going to increase your chance of catching COVID-19. But the way they were using it was totally inappropriate. They were treating the cloth masks as these sort of permanent things, where, if anything, they should be considered more disposable than a paper mask. So there's this sort of psychology that we're kind of fighting against right now. Even with those, I think people think, oh, if I get a cloth mask, I'll just wear this cloth mask all the time and it'll be great and I'll be protected. And really, ideally, you're wearing it for an hour or two and then you're swapping it out. You're treating it as biohazard and you're washing the hell out of them every night. And maybe, who knows from there how long you can reuse them. And nobody's approaching masks like that in terms of the public message that's getting out, and the CDC did not help with that, to be honest. So anyway, right now my mom was an epidemiologist. So speaking of cold calling people, I'm cold calling all her old colleagues and sort of hitting them up for information on how to approach making this non-PPE mask that's more disposable and ideally more effective and protective. Because if people are using them for brief amount of times, disposing of them correctly, ideally they'll actually be more effective and then cheaper to make. So I just posted a link to some promising research I saw today, basically a similar person to our group doing really interesting research and trying to make a cheaper mask. But with the N95s, yeah, we're not pursuing that right now.
John asked a question about creating a platform to share information. The simplest, quickest thing might be to create a Google Drive folder, but I'll work with Michael, and I don't want to add more staff work to ACSA because they're as busy as everybody else. But we can certainly create a shared folder of some kind. And you and Alex are already in touch. Maybe Alex, you and I can trade some ideas about what's the most efficient expedient. And then I'll be in touch with ACSA with Mike and see if that works, if they want to host something on their site, if it's not too much effort on their part. I wanted to circle back, Heather, to your question about reusing things, disposing of things properly. There's an incredible amount of waste being generated probably, right? And I think being conscious of that, what's the repercussion of trying to wash something? What's the repercussion of trying to recycle something? I know Alex had mentioned that I think the injection mold material is recyclable. So, does it have to be sterilized in a certain way or recycled in a certain way? What do you know anything about those kinds of steps yet?
So the PETG that we're using for the face shield can be sterilized by the doctors and nurses. The injection molded parts are FDA food grade polypropylene. And so if we can get those back from the hospital can sterilize all of that stuff themselves. But if we can get them back from the hospital, we can grind them up and we can make new products with those pellets.
Excellent. And you've got folks in the warehouse who've got whatever it takes to grind that up and repurpose it?
Yeah, so the industry that we're working with, or the manufacturer that we're working with, has that facility to grind and then make pellets and put right back into their machine.
Heather, what is that factoring into your research into the cloth masks that you're looking at now?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we're thinking about. It's a little weird. In theory, the cloth masks that most people are making, most of the designs are designed to be very hardy. I mean, you'd be able to wash them and reuse them over and over and over again. If people had enough of those, that would be functional. But the city of Charlotte asked us for 500 cloth masks for first responders, bus drivers, and sanitation. And I think they're thinking that each person gets one mask. So I think if we could meet that demand, that would work. With the materials that we're looking at papers primarily. the hard part is that most of them have a wire in the nose to keep it form-fitting. The bands, since elastic's really hard to come by, we're sort of scrapping the whole idea of elastic anyway. So they should be a little bit easier to recycle. Yeah, that's a little ways off yet.
Sure. Someone's just posted another link with some NIH approved designs that folks can download. Maybe Mike, you can help us keep track of all these hyperlinks. This webinar is being recorded, so this will be on the website relatively soon. I don't know if the chat box gets captured in that recording, but we can also try to follow up with some of these hyperlinks and create a file to post online somewhere to share. Recording is captured with the recording. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I don't know if there's another pressing question that I've missed from the chat box. Or if there's someone who wants to chime in from the audience, from the viewership out there, by just unmuting themselves and asking directly a question, you feel free to do so.
Maybe if you can just talk about the administrative support. How do you, because look, we see faculty here and maybe managers of the lab. We don't see deans or department chairs. So I'm just wondering how this was resolved. I like the idea of acting and then asking for, acceptance later, but I think it's how this will work and how you, because I think administrative support can be very big in this case. So I'm just wondering how you engage this and how we can maybe lessons to energize our administrators.
Alex, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're my boss, so and you're the director of our program, so it is kind of pointed at you. I asked to take equipment home. That wasn't an issue. I asked to be a part of some of this team, and I think perhaps because it wasn't out of UNC Charlotte, we were doing a couple prototypes on our equipment that we've kind of shielded UNC Charlotte from all of the administrative approvals that I'm hearing other schools having trouble getting through. But I will say that when it came time to begin production and starting to use some resources, I went to both José, my director, and Brooke Muller, who is our dean, and neither of them had an issue with it. Both of them took the track that we were going to do this because it was the right thing to do, and that they were going to try to support myself and Robbie, and if Brooke approves it, by default, Tom and Heather, to get this work done. And quite frankly, both Brooke and José have said that they will step in the line of fire for any pushback that comes down the road. I can say today that our nonprofit that we just got was from UNC Charlotte. UNC Charlotte helped us get our nonprofit status today. So they have been incredibly supportive. I agree, I'm not the administrator, so I'm kind of hoping maybe José can dig a little bit deeper into your question about maybe his concerns about this down the road, or strategies for dealing with this and allowing us to have autonomy moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, one of the things that we do have at UNC Charlotte is with respect to this kind of engagement, community engagement, we do have a campus administration that is friendly to these kinds of initiatives, that a campus administration, provost and chancellor who are very much engaged with the mission of the university, which is to serve the region. We're a community of a university of access, as we like to call ourselves. So the idea that the university could play a role in this larger challenge that the region faces, there's been no resistance. It's been a no-brainer all along. No one has raised a red flag. Now, to Alex's point, he came and borrowed the equipment and took it home because campus is closed. The only way we could get this off the ground was for Alex and Tom and Heather to take the initiative to say, can we take these things home? We heard about this project. We want to chime in. Can we use some materials? We'll get more because there's a whole open source group going on. my gut reaction was, yeah, do it as quickly as you can, right? And we didn't second guess it. We didn't second guess them. We have faith in our faculty. At least I think Brooke would, I can't speak for him, but I think he would share my opinion. We have faith in our faculty to do the right thing and to do it in the best way that they possibly can. We did have a question the other day. Alex needed access to the laser labs. It's not very easy to take the laser cutters home, but they needed to produce a bunch of shields, needed to be cut on the laser cutters. Could they have a student RA go in and run the machines to cut these plastic films? We said sure, but we took the proper steps to ask to make sure that student's health would be protected. We talked to the research office on campus. Robbie and Alex early on had gotten exemptions to be able to go in and out of the shop, even though the campus was closed. We got the research office to grant that exception to their lab assistant, one of their research students, to be able to go in and fabricate. And we told them exactly why, but this was also someone who was going to go into an empty building, into an empty laser lab, would be working independently, so there was no need for worry about social or physical distancing, for example. So we haven't gotten any pushback. We haven't had anybody. The only concerns that have been raised have been around safety. Are we doing things when we have someone come to campus? Are we doing that in a way that's protective of their safety? Are we taking that into account? That's been the only question, and it was a pretty quick one to answer. But everybody's first reaction has been, yes, let's do it. Let's figure out how to make sure it can be done safely.
And I can speak a little bit further. So I know some of the bigger issues are, okay, you're going to produce this work, and even if it's a prototype or even if it's an affiliation, you could hold some liability at the end of this. And so what we're doing, and from my understanding of this, and I could be wrong as I'm 10 days old into this business, we, as a donation, they assume liability in taking our donation. As a purchased product, so we have a commitment to donate 10,000 units to whomever, and so far we've donated some to the biggest hospitals. As a recipient of that donation, they assume liability. On the purchase parts, so we have contracts with different people who want to purchase. We are asking them to waive liability, and that has hung us up. But we have gotten both hospitals to waive liability for the purchase orders that they want to have. So even though this group that we've created, the Charlotte Medi Group, has people affiliated, we've put that under a nonprofit, and we've made sure that we can waive ourselves of liability for any purchase orders. And we have taken steps collectively as a group to remove the university from some of the liability issues. And I assume at this point, whoever's been looped in administratively from this whole nonprofit question that came up and that we got, I assume that they have vetted this process enough to feel like the UNC Charlotte moniker and name could be assigned to this group, or at least keep us under their umbrella. But that's been our strategy with the hospitals. Have been, if you're going to purchase these things, sign the waiver. If you'd like some donations, you're assuming liability.
We're going to run out of time, and someone's asking about a little bit more about how the not-for-profit got set up. You're 10 days into it and there's already a not-for-profit set up. So what were the steps that were required for getting that going, and what would someone need to ask at their own institution to get that going?
I wish I really had the answer. I'm going to reach out to this question outside of this to make sure we don't run out of time. But I believe it became easier for us if we fell under an existing nonprofit. To get our own status as a group would have taken time. Okay. To fall under somebody else who would perhaps sponsor us in a way allowed it to happen this quickly. We originally had somebody else. We had a veterans group called the Wheelhouse Group, or the Wheelhouse Nonprofit. They were going to sponsor us, and for whatever reason, things kind of fell apart, perhaps legally. And so the university stepped up, and we've had those people, the Mark Colognes of our world, in our building, who run our finances, and the people in the nonprofit area of our building, stepped in and talked with some of the other people in the organization to set this up. I can get some more of those answers, and share. Again, email me and I will find you the answers or put you in touch with those answers. But the easy answer is that falling underneath somebody else's nonprofit allowed us to do it as quickly as we did.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, I mean, I think that just sort of echoes the idea that folks at the upper levels of our university administration are supportive of this effort. It's not just a UNC Charlotte effort. That I think that helps. There are high schools, public and private. There are medical industry professionals involved. And so it is a team that can take on the task with some confidence. We're playing a critical role. I should say Alex, Heather, Robbie, and Tom are playing a critical role in supporting that larger effort. But it's just one piece in that larger effort. So this umbrella of someone else's not-for-profit somehow at the university level is how it's come together quickly for this particular group. But it's likely if you've got a university that has a community engagement mission, a Carnegie engaged community campus, for example, that they might be able to, they may have some kind of a structure like that already. Well, everybody, I appreciate it. It's 5:17 on a Friday afternoon, and it's getting pretty close to beer 30 on my neck of the world.
I think Ronit has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss one? Yeah. What's the question?
You're on mute.
Ronnie, you're on mute.
Okay, is this hard?
You are?
Yes.
Thanks. Sorry I joined late. Ronit Eisenman from University of Maryland. Great to be here. I had studio until 5. Which by the way, we're using a platform called Mural, which has been really, really helpful for working together at the same time. It's very fun. I can send people a link and what my students are doing. So my question is, we have a group of students who are working with our maker space to also be printing stuff out. And I sent the link, and there's some folks in engineering who are doing research also on PPEs and reusing some of the materials in the hospitals that are being thrown away for that. But on a different note, and so apologize, I joined late, so if you've already talked about this, are any groups doing other things, like our studios helping with laying out temporary hospitals? Are there other creating spaces for people to get food? I'm just curious to know what other things schools are doing in this arena, if anybody had shared that. Because like what we are doing is this printing stuff, and I'm also working with a local community that's working with Kaiser Permanente and thinking about that. But I'm curious to hear what other things are happening in the schools, if anything, that you all know about. You know, has anybody reconfigured their studios to be focusing on the problems at hand?
I can, relative to what I know, again, as Alex pointed out, I'm the interim director with the school right now. We've been navigating the transition to remote learning. And everyone has kept, from what I know, their project statements in place to ease that transition rather than pick up a new project. But Mike, I don't know, have you heard from other schools? Has anyone taken this on in a topic, in a class, a studio, or of any kind?
I haven't heard well enough about that. I think most of it has been continuing to finish the academic term and just navigating online, like you said.
I do know, I do know that our campus, they've asked all the students to leave the dorms, but they're now taking some of those dorms and they're beginning to plan for field hospital and potential quarantine units on our campus. And I think Atrium Hospital, one of the local hospitals, is part of that. There's a hospital just across, just one side of the campus. So we're getting.
Can I say a word to what Rona just? So this is Steve from UMass, and I think it's I think it's an excellent question, and we've been struggling in this new environment to how to deal with it. The problem is that we're in a stay-at-home order, so basically going into any kind of a public space to measure, like for a field hospital or something like that, would be, basically a violation of that stay-at-home. And we're not willing to put our students at risk, for that, most of whom have scattered anyway, for something that we know is a public health issue.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all, I'm in that situation in Maryland as well. But I do wonder, and also similar, we are also, this is our first week of being online, trying to figure out how to do that. And for the most part, we decided to stick with our, curricular and projects. But I'm really hearing from the students and also looking at what folks in the AIA are doing and in other design fields. I do, and maybe this is another webinar, Mike, about ways, maybe it's extracurricular beyond the curriculum. But it does feel, I don't want us to look back and like in the 60s and say, well, the architecture schools we didn't do something and we have tremendous skills. And I'm seeing our engineering colleagues jumping in to be doing things. And so I just wonder, maybe it's a person at one school with another person without, there are drawings that exist of those dorms without anybody having to go there, right? Our students can easily lay out beds. And so and maybe it's something AIAS would be interested in, but it just feels like we have a collective skills that it might not fit into our curriculum, but that are other ways that we might be able to assist. And so just something to think about, and maybe it's something to brainstorm about given, and there's ways to share things. So just a thought, we haven't been successful in that yet. But now that we've gotten 1 week under our belt, feeling like maybe we should, consider ways we might connect to one another or connect people and add that a little bit to our plate. So Mike, it's a thought. Maybe there's a way to have a conversation on that. So thank you.
I don't know if this will help at all. Like I said in the beginning, I'm an engineer, so my background is different from most of y'all's, but my final projects for my animation class is text animation. Most of my students are graphic designers. So it was pretty easy to adapt that to looking at the CDC guidelines for caring for sick patients, how people in the home should manage that safely. And I'm having my students do text animations of those guidelines and working in small teams. And then the United Nations has a similar call out for poster design work that's basically informational. So I think it's, if you can figure out what the core technical skills are for particular projects, it's not super hard to figure out how can you shift it sort of 45 degrees to align with something that's more relevant. At least for visual artists, maybe that's easier at this point in time.
Well, we are pushing up on our hour-and-a-half limit. Thank you for everything you've shared with us today. Heather, Tom, Alex, Robbie had to leave earlier. Thanks, Steve and Mary, Najid, everybody who's chimed in. Mike, thanks for facilitating this. And I do think that there are probably other conversations that could build from this. And maybe as that network grows, different faculty at different schools may want to share what they're doing, or they want to come together just to trade ideas and brainstorm a little bit. I'm sure Alex and Robbie would love to do that. I'm their boss, so I can volunteer them. I can't volunteer Heather, but she talks to lots of folks.
I think the idea of getting something on the ACSA, and John and I have been going back and forth both in chat and email, trying to figure out what I can do to help. We already host all of our files on our website, but there are logistics. There are questions that get asked, whether it's about administration or about just where these files come from. I am happy to share with that. I'm happy to circle back with Mike at some point via email and kind of however we can position it on the ACSA so that we can get the best information out there to the most people.
Thank you, man. That's really great. I'll help Mike. You know how to get in touch with Alex, but let me know what I can do to help if it's possible to share stuff on ACSA's website. And with that, I'm going to say it's beer 30, dudes and dudettes, cats and kittens. See you all virtually. Hopefully you will have a pleasant weekend, appropriately distanced. but still social.